When I thought about what to say for this TEDx talk today, I thought a lot about what I wanted the overall message to be. It's not every day you get up on a TEDx stage. So I knew I wanted to make it a powerful and meaningful message. And like the good Cuban girl I am, I wanted to thank my parents. So let's get that out of the way. Thank you, mommy, papi. I thought I'd write an argument based on research. So I thought about how immigrants are good and racists are bad. I looked on the Pew Research Foundation for stats on immigrant groups, searching for why some immigrant groups have been accepted while others have been shunned. And I came to this statistical realization. Today, compared to the overall foreign and US-born population, Cubans are less likely to be proficient in English, have lower educational attainment, and have lower household incomes. This all from the most recent US Census. Being a co-founder of an organization like Latin Mafia, I couldn't quite fit what we see day to day with our company with these statistics. Where new Latin American entrepreneurs and businesses come to us to help spread their stories that have positive global market impacts. I realized that the same way I can look at this data and analyze it to try to convince you that immigration brings and fosters growth, power, and diverse communities, racists can take the same data, manipulate it to convince you of the exact opposite. And I finally had a eureka moment. I had this conversation with, let's call him Paint Guy. We were at a paint and wine class. And just to show you that racism can pop up anywhere. And Paint Guy asked me, where are you from? And I said, Cuba. And he said, oh, born there? And I said, yeah, I came on a raft. He perked up. Well, I don't have an issue with you, he said. I do have issue with those that are coming now. So I asked him why, and his response was like, well, they're just different. Which I looked at him and said, I think the reason you don't have an issue with me is because I'm the finished product. You see, I didn't come to the US with a $45 blowout, speaking English, or a millennial sense of entitlement. It was then that I realized that I had to share the story on how you go from being someone that a racist can take issue with to someone that they can accept. I was born in Cuba to two people who are all about the big picture. My mom and dad met in college. My dad was a professor. My mom was a student. Risque, we know. And my mom worked selling candies door to door. And my dad worked as a professor for teaching mechanical engineering at the University of Havana. One day, my dad told a class of communist youth that a Japanese mechanical part was better than a Russian mechanical part. A week later, my dad was fired, and it was then in 1991 that my dad realized big picture communism just wasn't his jam. He tried for weeks to convince my mom that the only solution was for us to get out of there. My mom was 20 years old. That's 8 years younger than I am today. And she just couldn't conceive of a plan where she left everything behind, especially with two kids. The thought of risking everything she had, her entire family, on a raft seemed too much to bear. So she put her foot down and said no. It was then that my dad told her that if she was out, then he'd take us in the middle of the night and she'd never see us again. It was then she decided that she quite literally had to get on board. No pun intended. My dad moved forward with getting the raft the same way any super secret escape plan begins. In Cuba, he knew a guy who knew a guy, and a Cuban soldier sold him the raft for 30,000 US dollars, motor not included. Convincing my mom to leave was one thing. Convincing her to sell everything they owned to make this happen was something completely else. Furniture, food, all our clothes, keeping only those on our backs in order to afford this raft. It took several months for my parents to get the money together. It took only 8 hours for the Cuban Coast Guard to catch us in the ocean. Once they caught us, they put my dad in jail, 1 year without trial and 1 year post-trial in prison. My mom spent 1 year under house arrest taking care of us. Big picture, they had failed. They had absolutely failed. And the only memories from this time that I have are from postcards and letters my dad would write my mom from jail. 2 years later, my dad was out of prison and out of hope. That is until his friend Manolo came knocking. Every immigrant runaway story has an accomplice, and this was Manolo. Manolo had bought the semblance of a raft for $100 and went on to find investors the same way any Silicon Valley startup would, with a friends and family round. Manolo's elevator pitch to my dad was that Guantanamo Bay was now open. The deliberations in Washington over the Wet Foot, Dry Foot Act had allowed us to reach the promised land without actually having to get there. All we had to do was reach international waters. They later implemented it so that you actually had to reach American soil in order to reach freedom. Sold on the plan and equipped with a 1959 copy of a magazine called Popular Mechanics, they got working on this raft. In 1993, the average American household made $52,000 a year. Here are my third world country parents spending over $45,000 in 3 years to make their dreams come true. Take two. This time, there were 4 families on board. There were 3 women, 6 kids, and 10 men. 12 hours in, we were hit by a thunderstorm with 15-foot waves. We'd see bodies floating nearby. My mom now describes it as a cemetery Disney ride. I asked my parents later why they didn't join forces with the other rafts they'd see out at sea. Make a super raft, safety in numbers, caravan style. Their reasoning? Fear. 14 hours later, we were caught, this time by the US Coast Guard. They packed us together tightly onto their boat with blankets, and they picked up more Cuban rafters along the way. That night, we were taken to a larger ship. We walked into the expansive hallway with thousands of people sitting in pieces of cardboard on the floor, everyone in white overalls. We spent 1 week on this ship. Every 5 minutes, a voice over the loudspeaker would come on and threaten us, let us know that there was no free press on board, that we would not be reaching the US. Anytime a fight broke out, anytime someone lit a cigarette or anything happened that the US soldiers didn't like, they'd spray everyone down with water. When we arrived to Guantanamo, they separated families from single men, and then they separated those single men into groups of people who had tattoos and didn't have tattoos. Tattoos meant that you had done time in prison, and they were potentially sent back. There was nothing in these camps at first, just rows of tents with 31 people per tent, 1 pipe with running water, and no clothes, small boxes with food, the same kind that they give in airplanes today. Spaghetti was my favorite. And we spent 7 months in this camp. My dad would play dominoes with the other men. My mom took care of us. And there was a church tent that we were allowed to go to. My mom thought it was a good idea as long as we got to learn English, even if it was in the form of Christian songs. During that time, the rest of our family back home waited by the radio, trying to listen to the names of the bodies found at sea or the names of the people that had arrived to the US. Every day, 4 or 5 soldiers would come to the tent. They would call out the names of those that were leaving that day. One day was our turn. I wish I could tell you that I felt amazing and relieved, but honestly, I just felt it was a period marked by uncertainty and fear. Even on the day that when we were getting released, I only felt more confusion. There's no fairy tale moment in my memory. They're just gradual changes. We said goodbye to our 10 friends and soldier friends, and we walked over to the bus. This bus took us straight to my first airplane ride and flew to the military base of Homestead, Florida. I remember getting off and seeing all of these adults I'd never seen before. Everyone was so excited and crying. And I remember just looking up and seeing my mom crying and not understanding why. I cry now, though, because I understand that 32,000 men and women drowned while trying to reach freedom. Only 34,000 made it. That's basically a 50-50 shot. I cry at our own incredulous luck. I'm lucky that I didn't drown. I'm lucky that I went to college. I'm lucky that I got a job. And I'm lucky that I'm standing here today. So to painter guy, I say, tell me, how am I different? I'm also one of those little refugee kids with a snotty nose who only knew how to say this little light of mine in English. There's no concrete happy ending. There's not even a real beginning, middle, or end. And contrary to what people think, no matter how far you get in life, whether you're sitting at a members only club or getting microaggressive racist comments at a paint and wine class, your status as an immigrant will always shape your outlook in some way. There's no such thing as a fully integrated immigrant, no matter how much they appear to be assimilated or to be achieving the American dream. Even the most successful of persons will always, in some sense, be an immigrant. And because of this, there's no reason to discriminate on the kinds of people who we should or shouldn't allow in. And that's just it. Big picture, I am the finished product of an unachievable American dream. Thank you.